I'm going to record. Alrighty. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here. And if you're watching this on recording, thank you for bringing up the recording. I know many of you are watching it that way. This is a little webinar called Help Them Hear You, Communicating Effectively with Ohio Legislators. And I'm the Reverend Joan VanBecelaere with Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio down in Columbus. And Larry, if you want to introduce yourself, he's our other co-host tonight.
I'm Larry Breslter from up here in Cleveland with Organize Ohio and the End Poverty Now Coalition.
Great. And Larry and I have been hanging out at the State House for probably far too long. And we're going to share with you some of our opinions, some of our things that we've observed, some that our other, folk that we have been involved with the last few years have observed about effective communication with our Ohio legislators. But as we start, I want to center us with just a few words from John Lewis, who said that nothing can stop the power of a committed and determined people to make a difference in our society. And why is that? Because human beings are the most dynamic link to the divine on this planet. And so with that, we will start this evening. Just to let you know, this workshop is in preparation for what we're calling State House Stomp on September 22nd, when we're doing a legislative meeting, rally, and education day for legislators around anti-protest bills. Larry will say a little bit more about that. But I know that some of you are also prepping for testimony and State House meetings with legislators around other issues, around issues like, the voter rights, anti-voter bill, or bills that are there, and around some of the climate justice bills that are there. So we'll be cognizant of those, but a lot of this is preparation, a very short introduction to preparation and ways to effectively get your message across to legislators both in Ohio, and you can apply a lot of these to the US Senate and our US representatives, although we're not going to go into that in any great detail. Okay, we'll start with a little picture here. This is what a typical hearing looks like at the Ohio legislature. That is one of the basement rooms where the House of Representatives folk usually meet, one of their committees. But just to give you some idea of what we're talking about when we talk about hearings and testimony and the context for that. And Larry, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I'm going to go talk a little bit about the anti-protest bill and some of the other bills that we're working to deal with very, very, very succinctly and not giving them a whole lot of time. But there's three anti-protest bills that are currently up, and I might add before I go into them that when they were introduced, they were much, much worse than they are now. They're still not good, but they're much, much worse than they are now. And that's because of the activism that we've done up to this point in terms of fighting them. Doesn't mean that the bad ones won't come back or the new bad ones won't come in, but right now they're not as bad as they were. The original House Bill 109 made it a second-degree felony would have made it a second-degree felony for people to protest, doing peaceful civil disobedience, marching without a permit. You could be put in jail for 10 years for that. Now they put it down to a first-degree misdemeanor, still bad, with up to 6 months in jail. Also allows for organizations to be sued or charged for corrupt activity, for supporting protests where somebody commits vandalism. Doesn't even have to be the organization's plan for that or anything like that. They can get charged. It's the idea to stop the dissent of organizations to organize and assist protesting. Second bill is HB 22, which would make it illegal, make it a crime to distract police officers who are trying to do their duty. So if you were yelling at a police officer, or if you were even filming a police officer using your video camera and they were trying to arrest somebody, they could say you were obstructing, they could arrest you. if you were within an arm's length of a police officer in a march, and the officer was trying to get somebody, he could arrest you for that because you were obstructing what he was trying to do. So again, it's a way of trying to keep things from happening. In addition, you throw an object or obstacles in an officer's direction, you could also be arrested, even if it was litter or confetti. And then the final bill is SB 41, which could make it a 5th-degree felony up to a year in prison if you were writing with chalk, or if you were defacing public property in any way, and it could be even chalk. Although if you did this on a library or a school or other public building, and you wrote paint or chalk or anything, or a parking meter, you could be arrested for up to a year in prison. So those are basically the anti-protest bills that we've been trying to deal with, and we're trying to stop, all of which are aimed at trying to stifle the dissent as a result of Black Lives Matter actions about a year ago. Go to the next one. And so these are, you will have access to these, but this kind of shows in a nutshell what all these bills would do. We're also very active around the voter suppression bills. The one that has gotten all the attention is this HB 294, which would very much limit the use of ballot drop boxes, which was a big, and one in a county that would have to be by the Board of Elections. It would impose more confusing ID requirements. It would cancel the early voting on Mondays before the election day. And from my perspective, the worst of them is that it requires an additional ID in order to get in order to do absentee balloting. And there are other problems with it as well. Meanwhile, last week, a much worse bill was introduced called HB 387. And the key parts of that, I mean, is just so outrageous. One, it would eliminate absentee voting altogether, unless you were ill or disabled for all practical purposes, or you were out of the state or during the whole election process period. Secondly, it would require government produced voter IDs, driver's license, etc., in order to be able to vote for everybody. So you would have to show, you would have to show a photo ID in order to be able to vote. You would, it would, let's see, it would also outlaw drop boxes altogether, no drop boxes any place anymore. And it would also only allow voting machines that are made in the United States to be used and have to be approved. Just an outrageous bill, and something we're gonna have to watch very closely to make sure it doesn't gain any traction. Next slide. And then this one I know very little about, but basically it allows the commercialization to be able to selling in Walmarts, commercialization of radioactive and oil and gas waste, such as aqua salina, which contains high degrees of stuff and a variety of other stuff. And this is another bill that people have been very active with. So you're going to have access to all this PowerPoint here, and here will be links that will be to all the stuff that I told you up to this point, and much better, I might add. Goes to you, down, Joan.
Okay. Well, some of the things that we should know about various bills. Tons of bills are introduced every session, of course. About 20 of them, or 20% rather of them, are introduced and passed. The ones that have the least chance historically have been ones that are expensive, involve major changes to the legislation or regulation. And those that deal with unpopular issues, on the other hand, there seems to be more of an appetite for passing unpopular bills now than there's been in the past. Do you agree with me on that one, Larry?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, they're not ones that we support.
That's right. You want me to take this one or you?
I can go ahead.
Okay.
So when we're talking to legislators, there's certain things that we need to know, we need to talk about. One is that we need to know the issues thoroughly. If we're talking, they're going to ask us questions. They're going to assume we know about it. What my experience has been, unless it's a piece of legislation the legislator knows well, or that he or she has been involved with, you never can assume a legislator is going to know what's happening. My experience is that legislators know almost nothing. And so you need to have all the answers going in. And by doing that, you're going to be one step ahead. So if you're talking to a legislator, know the issue thoroughly. You want to know the legislative process. You want to know where it is in committee. Later, Joan's going to talk to you about how you can follow that. But we want to know what the dates of the hearings, what the votes are. Nothing's worse than you want to testify or you want something to be happening and it's already passed. So you want to be on top of the whole legislative process. You want to look for changes and amendments in bills. This can be very, very difficult because changes and amendments to bills and committees, frequently you cannot find them on the bills afterwards. It can be very difficult. So you've got to be very diligent in terms of trying to find that out. It's good in terms of addressing all of this to find a lawmaker who's sympathetic or to your issue and be a proponent to your cause. I will tell you as an example, with the anti-protest legislation, we've had Representative David Leland, who's the ranking Democrat in the committee, who's been absolutely phenomenal on our side, both in committee and helping us in terms of knowing everything that's happening so we can be in the right position at the right time. Having somebody that you can connect to can be invaluable. Know at which point you can make an impact. If you need to know when the committee hearing is going to happen, you want to know when the committee is going to happen that you can testify at. You want to know when you want to reach out to other legislators. You don't want to be necessarily trying to get people on your side for a Senate bill that's still in the House, as an example. And if you can, and this is frequently a luxury, but if you can have a point person who's down at the State House or somebody you know at the State House who can talk with aides and legislators, that's wonderful. For me, that never happens, but it's wonderful. But there are groups that do that, and it's wonderful to connect with them. So there are a host of legislative advocacy activities that you can do. One is postcards and traditional petitions. I don't think that they're the best. For one, they get ignored. But unless you have thousands and thousands of names and petitions, legislators tend to ignore them. I would agree with the same thing is true with mass emails, where everybody is saying the same thing time and time again. Now, mass emails with everybody putting their own message can be very effective. But I think just people sending in emails, if you're where they've copied and pasted the same message, sometimes they tend to be ignored. Having said that, personal letters, personal emails can be very effective, particularly if you're if it's your own legislator. Telephone calls can be effective at the right time, particularly if you're bombarding them. Many years ago, we organized a voting against one legislator who was going to be real key, and we tied up his phones because he couldn't call in and couldn't call out. Boy, did we make an impact on that piece of legislation at the time. Again, I talked about personal emails, using social email, following the lawmaker's Twitter or responding to Twitter or the Facebook can be effective way of getting to a legislator. Testimony, which we're going to talk about later. In-person meetings, which we're going to talk about later. Zoom meetings or conference calls we'll talk about later.
So let's talk about public witness events, which we didn't put on that little list. But this is one of those things that we always think about when we start talking about communicating with legislators or getting our voices heard. We think about it in terms of assembly and freedom of speech and standing out in public and having our say, right? And these are really good. Public witness events are really good for education, both for ourselves and for others who come and attend the event. They're really good to organize because, people who haven't been involved can see the public witness event and they might want to join up and become part of your movement. And they're good for publicity and to get media attention. If you can get the, 6 o'clock of the news people down there, and if you've got some great speakers and maybe a little street theater, with some drama to it, then you can make the evening news. Do the legislators listen to this? Good question. If there's enough people, then the legislators tend to pay attention. But that has to be a ton of people. We're talking lots. Otherwise, unfortunately, our legislators right now tend to have this little attitude that, well, and this is almost a quote from one of them, well, you can sit on the steps of the state capitol and play your guitars and sing Kumbaya and wave your signs, and that's fine with us. That's their idea of protest and getting a message across. But they don't have to listen to it and they don't have to pass by you and they don't have to look at your signs. So public witness events are great for what they're for, but in terms of communicating with legislators, not as effective as the things we're really going to talk about, which are testifying and hearing, meeting in their offices, either locally or at the State House, or even a Zoom call. Okay. And one of the things that I do want to raise again is State House Stomp on September 22nd, because not only are we going to do a public witness event and get some media there, but we are also going to be meeting individually with the legislators in their offices with some of their with you as their constituents. And that is going to be really effective. So I wanted to say that about, public protest, public witness, because that's something that we always tend to think of. We're going to talk about how we track a bill, how we know what's going on, because as Larry said, you got to know what's happening with these bills. You got to know what the information is around them. You have to know when they change so that you don't wind up coming in and testifying about something that the committee has already amended. And then, of course, they just toss out anything you have to say because you're not up on the latest. And yes, the tracking of a bill looks a whole heck of a lot like this maze. It really does. So what you got to do when you're talking about a bill that you want to either support or oppose is you have to find out what it does, where it's in the process. You can do this by going to the legislature's website. I've got the address there, and I'll show you in just a minute what this stuff looks like online. You search then by bill number or name of the sponsor, but frankly, bill number is your best bet. And then if you can't find the bill number, then you call the sponsor's office and you ask them for the bill number. Sometimes we learn about bills that are being proposed and we hear about them and they haven't even gotten a number yet. So sometimes you got to be a little patient. And if it hasn't been introduced yet, but is still in development, then focus on something else for a little while until the bill is actually proposed, because it may not get enough sponsors and it may not get a committee assignment, depending on the politics of the situation. Just because we hear about it, know that people are putting it together doesn't mean it's going to show up. And if a bill that you support hasn't yet been introduced or opposed either, then you can call the lawmakers and you can, think that might be interested in your issue, ask for a meeting, see where things are at. You have the right not only to oppose a piece of legislation, that has been proposed. But you can talk to your legislators and ask them to propose something. You can talk to them and ask them to give amendments to current legislation. You can talk to them and ask them to take up an issue that is near and dear to your heart that you think really has legs. So there's all kinds of things you can do, and we don't do it. Meeting individually with legislators and testifying in hearings are the two least used methods of communicating, and yet they are the two most effective. Least used, but most effective, because they're scary. That's why we want to do this workshop, so you're not scared to do those. Okay, what a bill looks like online. Let me see if I can pull this up for you so that you can see what you will see when we, there we are. This is what it looks like when you look up a bill, House Bill 22. I went to search legislation, looked up how HB 22, and it gave me all this wonderful committee activity or a summary, which is minor, documents. It actually shows the bill is introduced and as passed and as amended. It tells you what the status is. The fact that 22 has passed out of the House and is now into the Senate, but has not yet been assigned to a Senate committee. It'll go to Judiciary. And what the votes were. And then one thing that's really fascinating is to look at the committee activity. So for House Bill 22, there was an initial meeting, another hearing where there were some proponents from the Columbus Division of Police. And then there were hearings where opponents came in and testified. And there were opponents, and there were more opponents, and there were even more opponents. And you can download all this and read their testimonies. Some of these were written, but some of these were actually brought and given in person at the hearings. There was a fourth hearing, which they didn't want to do, bless their little hearts, but we were there and we said we want to be heard, and we had all these people and all this opponent testimony. You get the idea here, right? There was a lot of opposition to House Bill 22, and we did get it amended in a major way that was good, but it didn't stop it. And it was voted out of committee and is now over in the Senate. But the Senate people are looking at all of this opponent testimony as well. And we're going to have to do the same thing on the Senate side when it comes up for hearing, is bring our people, bring our opponent testimony, and show folk that House Bill 22, the anti-protest bill that says thou shalt not say boo to a policeman nor distract in any way, is not something that we want to create more legislation and laws around. So that's what that looks like. Also wanted to show you there's a House of Representatives separate website where actually the legislative amendments show up first before they show up on the larger legislature website. The larger legislature website is usually a little slow on this one, but there's one for the House of Representatives too. So just to let you know what those look like when you go to search out a bill. There's a lot of info there, a lot of information. But that way you can tell where it's at, what the opposition is, and you can read opposition testimony or proponent testimony that will help you then in writing your own testimony, whether as proponent or opponent. Okay. Now, you can also sign up for committee notices. You contact the staff of the chair of the committee where the bill is being heard, and you say, put me on your notice list so that you know when the hearings are being held for that committee and when the bills you're interested in are going to be up for either opponent or proponent testimony. And every week on Thursday or Friday, there's a note, usually there's notice of any hearing scheduled for the following week. Now, quite frankly, sometimes it doesn't show up till Monday morning. In one case, when we were dealing with House Bill, actually it was House Bill 22 on the fourth hearing, it didn't show up until the day before. And then they changed the date and the time and the room separately. This is where being in contact and communication with other people who are in coalition and looking at the same legislation will really, really help, because I might get notice from my friends on the committee about a change that hasn't even been announced yet, and then I can tell people who I know are already interested in that bill, which is what we do. But you got to be nimble and you got to be quick. And if you are writing proponent or opponent testimony, do it in advance before you even know if there's a hearing scheduled, because this hearing may be scheduled and you only have a day at the most to get your testimony in, because testimony has to go in 24 hours ahead of time, usually, and it has to be submitted on a particular form for that committee. For the House has one form and the Senate has another form. And we try to spread that news around when we get those forms and we know when the hearing is going to be. But sometimes when they really screw up and don't give you enough notice, they'll take your testimony late, but don't count on it. They'll even take your testimony if you show up and haven't submitted it yet, but don't count on it. Okay. So yeah, it's scheduled. They reschedule at the very last minute. If you'd like to testify, you wait for notice, and then you follow the instructions on the notice, and we put those out. Actually, we put them out on the UJO Facebook page too, but also Our Voices Together, which is the coalition that is dealing with these anti-protest bills. If your bill is flagged for a possible vote, contact your member if they're on the committee, your representative or your senator if they're on the committee, and remind them of how you'd like to see them vote on this, okay? And ask if they have any opinions, or their aides, if any of their aides have some knowledge. I do this, and I get little hints about what's going to be the most effective testimony, or where can we put our leverage and really get an amendment through, even if we can't stop the bill. Where can we get an amendment in there? And find out how the committee members voted. Well, then you check back after the hearing and you can see what they did, because that will also enable you to have more knowledge about leverage points when it goes to the other side of the legislature. If you know what happened in the House, you're forearmed about what you're going to do and say when you go over to the legislature, to the Senate side and their hearings. Does that make sense? Okay, once a bill is out of a committee, you watch for the calendars for the upcoming House or Senate session on the other side, right? To get alerts via email, like I said, you sign up at the clerk's office. Once you see your bill, you start making phone calls if you want your legislators to know how you want them to vote, and you start writing your testimony. Next Thursday, we have a whole workshop on how to write testimony, effective testimony, and deliver it. Okay. Another little bit of humor. Here's how a bill becomes law. What was actually needed, but then has introduced, and then how it actually comes out. So just to let you know that the sausage making does go on. Sometimes it goes on in the actual hearing. If there's enough pressure and enough people, we've actually had amendments proposed and voted on in hearings themselves. So things change quickly, unexpectedly, and we have to be incredibly nimble. Okay. And yes, this is what a hearing room looks like, although right now they are spacing people out. Actually, people space themselves out, and they usually have a second room with a TV in it so that folk can space themselves out more. But it really does look like this. And the legislators, bless their little hearts, the Democrats, you can tell because they wear masks. The Republicans, you can tell because they don't. And I know, Larry's laughing at me here, but I have been down to the State House, 6 times since I got vaccinated, right? And that's been true every time. It's been true every time. Okay, so I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about committee testimony, but the big oh, pardon me, I need to mute somebody here. But the big workshop on how to really craft your testimony and how to give it effectively and what parts to use is going to be next Thursday. This is just an introduction, okay? But both the House and the Senate in Ohio offer the opportunity to testify in person on the bills under consideration. No, you can't do it by Zoom. You can send in written statements, and yes, all of the legislators on the committee get the written statements, but I have seen them kind of glance over the written statements and go on. You know, they have them on their little iPads. The effective thing is when you show up, and when lots of people show up, it's incredibly effective. Especially after a year of pandemic when nobody was there, suddenly to show up with a whole group of folk is an incredibly effective and dramatic thing that we can do to get our point across. And as I said before, the opportunity to testify is not used nearly enough by people, and yet it is the most effective, or one of the most effective ways of getting our voices heard. Who can testify? Well, of course, you can have your influential, high profile, highly regarded people coming in their suits and the business stuff, and they do. And the lobbyists, right? Somebody who can give a personal experience related to the issue is really prized, because that means a lot to the legislators. And then interested citizens, everybody can come and testify. Yes, you can use some documented statistics, but this is not the whole point. I give statistics or magazine articles or research articles. I will put them in my written testimony, because you have to do a written testimony even if you're giving an oral statement. But I put them in my written, but I don't read them out loud, because that'll glaze their eyes over and they'll fall asleep and forget it. Besides, the committee chairs keep it to 3 minutes for testimony. Sometimes they'll give you 5 if there's not too many people, but usually it's 3. So you got to be super fast and super organized. Don't wing it, for heaven's sakes. Don't go up there and just wing it. Oh, I know this, I'll just talk. No, have it written, have it, organized, because you only got 3 minutes at the most. Relate the testimony to the committee members if you can. If you know anything about the guys on the committee, about the women, about the men, and you can relate some aspect of your testimony to them, it pricks up their ears and they hear it, and it makes them more of an impact on them. And pack the committee room with your friends. They can all testify in writing, even if they're too afraid to testify in person, but they could all show up and max out the waiting rooms and line the halls and do all the stuff that says we care about this issue. If you don't show up, they figure you don't care. Seriously. Just a little bit about testimony. You notify the office of the chair of the committee 24 hours in advance. That's what I was saying. You get a little statement, you fill out a form, you send in your written testimony, then you show up at the hearing and give your oral statement. You provide them with that electronic copy and then their witness slip. You contact the office of the committee chair for any exact requirements. Sometimes they'll give you a time limit. Sometimes they'll say, no, we're just taking testimony. And then, like I said, call your senator or rep. And if you want to take pictures or video at the hearing, you have to get permission. And there's little permit forms that you fill out there. Okay. But all of these hearings, by the way, are on the Ohio channel and they're broadcast. It's not Zoom. It's a one-way video only, but you can watch if you can't make it. There's an etiquette. There's a pro forma way of doing this. And the legislators really appreciate if you follow the format, because if you don't follow the format, they're just as likely to write you off. Okay. So you start with a little introduction. You'll get more of this next week. Who you are, why you're interested in this. You can do, like I said, you can do the writing if you can't be there in person. When you're done, the chair will ask if members have questions for you. and you stay there and answer any questions. You be polite and respectful, even if the question is totally stupid. You know, I mean, sometimes I've had questions asked of me and my initial response is, are you kidding me? But treat them seriously, treat them respectfully. Otherwise, they can write you off. And if you don't know the answer, we'll talk about this next week. Don't worry. You're not expected to be an expert unless you're presenting yourself as an expert, but you're not an expert. So you just relate to your own experience. And if you know where you can get the answer, you can say, hey, Representative Smith, I'll email you that answer when I get home because I know where to look it up. And they appreciate that. But there is an etiquette. There is a way of doing this. Some folk, bless her, I'll talk about it later, but some folk get all poetic or some folk get all dramatic. And frankly, you can just see the legislators write them off. So there is an etiquette to this. A story is great. If you cry during their story, bless your soul, that's okay. That's okay. But we've had people who've come in and decided to recite a 10-minute poem. All right, with a refrain. No. We've had people who come in and actually start quoting the Bible at length. No, it's not relevant. You know, there's just a line here. And I'm not one for etiquette that much myself, but I do know that if you want to be effective, sometimes there are structures that they expect. I hope that makes sense. And another little statement here about the what's happening in the State House. This is just some theater that is going on, a little example of some street theater. Yes, a single Bible verse. I always quote the Bible, but no, I don't go on for 20 minutes. Okay. All right, Larry.
So besides committee testimonies, we also want to meet with legislators in person. By and large, you know, I think the first priority is what we're doing is if they're in committee session, the legislators they're in committee. But I think anybody that's going to vote on it are people that we want to be meeting with, and it's in a very effective way. And you can do it individually, but I strongly recommend doing it as part of a group, a small group, but a group. There's kind of three ways you can be meeting with the legislators. You can be meeting with them with their offices in Columbus. You can be meeting with them in their community, or you can be meeting with them by Zoom. I'm going to talk about each of them. If you're trying to meet with a legislator in Columbus, well, in either way, even in the community, you want to generally call the legislator's office. You can find the number by looking up the legislator on the government on the government Cleveland. Ohio.gov representatives. And you can look up the legislator and you'll find the person right away, along with the phone number to try to set that up. If you know somebody good, you can probably get the aides direct line, and they may be able to connect them even quicker. But either way, you want to call the legislator's office to set up an appointment in the office. Next.
Excuse me. Pardon me. It's acting bad. There we go.
Okay. Again, one of the good things that's to do is do some research on a legislator before you're going to meet with him or her. Know how the legislators approach the subject matter, similar subject matters in the past, and that way it gives you a framework in terms of how you're going to do it. So, for example, a couple of years ago, I was meeting with a legislator. A group of us were meeting with a legislator who was a former teacher and was absolutely nuts over education stuff. So everything we talked to him about at the time in regards to what we came to see him, we related back to public education to try to get his support, and that was helpful. So knowing what the background of the legislator, know what their interests are, is very important. At the beginning, you and your group need to establish your credibility. my name is such and such. I'm here from wherever. I represent this group. Establishing credibility that I care about this issue, something, whatever. And then one of the things you always want to do with in-person meetings, no matter where you is, leave written supportive documentation when you leave. Leave stuff that beyond what you've talked about that they can go back and look at after you've left. Always include that. Next. With the group that you bring, and again, my assumption is you're going to bring groups. Prepare to have a personal story, at least one personal story about whatever the law or whatever you're trying to have the legislators support or oppose. Have a personal story prepared that somebody can set out. If you're alone, and generally, again, I strongly urge you to do it with a group. Indicate that you're speaking on behalf of a group of an organization. Again, you want to, as I mentioned earlier, you want to assume that the legislator knows nothing about your issue, even if you think he or she should absolutely know everything about it. I can never get over the fact of how ignorant legislators can be on issues that I assume that they know something about. So assume nothing in terms of what they know, and see what the legislator's done before, if that's ever been, if he's ever commented on this issue before. Again, doing part of your homework. Next. Expect to get 15 or 20 minutes of the legislator's time. But I would prepare to present a pitch right off the bat that would take 5 minutes or so. End it with a very specific, actionable request. Please support such and such a legislation. Please oppose such and such a legislation. We want to see this. We think the legislation is good, but it requires this additional amendment. It requires this additional funding. It's possible you could ask them to introduce new legislation if you think of somebody that's going to be on your side in an issue, or ask them to be a co-sponsor. But make a specific, actionable request. Again, as I said, when you leave, besides information about the legislation, leave your own contact information. As well as if there was other relevant articles about things that support what you've done that's happened in other states, leave that as well. I always follow up after I've seen a legislator, no matter where it is, with an email or a letter or something, thanking them for meeting with me. Again, recapping what you've said, just in a couple of paragraphs, and again asking for their support. And if you follow new information, feel free to forward it along. I tend to prefer, me personally, to meet with legislators in their own communities. And I'll tell you why. I think there's an advantage of meeting people in Columbus because you can meet with a whole bunch of different legislators there. But if you meet with them in their own communities, generally you have more time. Generally, they feel more comfortable with you there, and you can feel more comfortable with it there. And it's just a setting where you can have some much better give and take. That's been my experience. And also, they're not going to get called into they're likely not to be called into legislative session, which has happened to me time and time again, and cut meetings short in Columbus. Frequently, legislators will announce office appointments where you can just drop in, which you've done, or you can make an appointment with them, or they may have town hall meetings. You want to look for them, and you can look for them by getting on their mailing lists. You can look at their social media pages and hear about the types of opportunities that are happening. Look at those, and those are, besides just trying to set up meetings, you can look at ways to kind of have informal gatherings. Again, if you can't meet with them in person, look to do a conference call or a Zoom meeting. Next. Now, Zoom meetings obviously become very popular in these days and age of the pandemic, but I think they're here to stay. And I think there's going to be more and more Zoom meetings that we haven't had with legislators that we haven't had in the past. So there's a few tips that I would have. One, with whoever's the group that you have it very well organized with a specific order of speakers. Disorganization teams to manifest itself more if it happens in a Zoom meeting versus an in-person meeting. Again, that's been my experience. You have a large number of people speaking, maybe even a small number. Make sure that all people are muted who are not speaking. If there's background noise and even a small meeting, be sure to mute the person who isn't speaking. Use share screen to share important information. However, if you don't have to be using share screen, or if you're done with it, stop it, because it's better to see. You're in better shape being able to look at all of you being able to look at the legislator eye to eye, and it gives you greater impact than just talking to the legislator with this big document in front of you. And finally, just as we were doing before, after you've had the Zoom meeting or as soon as you're able, send an email to the legislator reiterating your points, legislator's commitment or request, and any documents you want the legislator to have.
Larry, Linda asked, does the organization set up the Zoom meeting? Like if you're with Sierra Club or whatever, or does the legislator? I mean, whose Zoom room?
That's a good question. My preference always is, without question, is to use my own Zoom room, and to offer to use my own Zoom room. It gives you slightly better control of what's happening, and I always prefer to do that. If the legislators insist or really want it, then that's okay. But I always say, how about if we use my Zoom number, then propose that, and 9 out of 10 times that will be what we use.
And you also asked about town halls, because I've heard that now legislators are inviting town halls again with some distancing, depending on the legislator. I mean, have you seen town halls being scheduled too?
Not any new ones, but not least not in my community, but they may be. But I think town halls are wonderful to go to. I think your questions are going to be shorter, but if you have an issue, you bring a whole host of people there around whatever issue you have. That can be very impactful.
Right now they're having redistricting hearings, and there's a whole slate of them that I have a slide on that I'll send you. And those are town halls or public events, and those are scheduled and being held now. So as we get
on Monday.
Yeah. So there's so many of them, and as we get closer to the 2022 elections, there's going to be more town halls.
Yes.
Okay, and this is confronting a legislator in the hall. Nice little picture there. And once again, what a legislative hearing looks like, a little spread out. This one was a little bit spread out. Larry?
I'm going to go through some of this pretty quickly, but when we're communicating our message to a legislator, some basic questions we want to ask, or a group of people. If we're trying to get other people, how do we get people, or in this case, the legislators, to think about our issue, and how do we get them to think about our issue in such a way as they want to solve them through the same way that we want to solve them? Go ahead. And I'm going to keep moving. Go past the next two. So if we're trying to get a legislator to come to where we are on a particular issue or a particular piece of legislation, I think the best way to approach it is through looking at the perspective of levels of understanding. And there are 3 levels of understanding. There's the big levels of understanding everybody can agree to, such as freedom, justice. Everybody believes, justice for all. Everybody believes in the opportunity for success. Everybody believes that we all have certain kind of responsibilities. And then there's kind of level 2 understandings that most people agree with. that we all want to have good health care. We want a clean environment. That we wish that we didn't have poverty. That everybody has a right to education. And then there's levels of understandings around our issue, around specific issues like the Affordable Care Act or welfare reform or the issues that we've been talking about today, the voting rights, voting rights or the anti-protest legislation and how we feel. If we're trying to get people to support the specific issues that we care about, I would argue, and I would indicate that what we want to do is we want to appeal to the level one, maybe level two, but certainly, levels of understanding that we can all agree to. So if we're talking about the anti-protest legislation, we might want to talk about, that we all believe in justice. Is it really justice to be jailing for 10 years somebody who writes chalk on a sidewalk? And that all of a sudden gets us all on the same page again. So talking about that we all believe in freedom for everybody. Is it really free is it free for all when we're not when people aren't being allowed to vote? So appealing to those level one areas that we can all agree to. And as we're talking about meeting with legislators, think about how we can appeal to the level one understandings that we can all agree to. Next one. So as we're doing that, we want to use the values to get people to care about the issues. And again, as we're talking to them, we want to develop our positions incorporating those values fully. We don't want to just say in the name of justice, in the name of justice, we want you to be opposed to the anti-protest bills. You want to frame it together in terms of why that's the case. But you also want to do it in a reasonable, explanatory tone. You don't want to be preachy. As soon as you become preachy, you're going to turn legislators off, and that's the end of it. Next. You can move on past the next two. Numbers. Joan mentioned this earlier. That if we're giving testimony or we're meeting with the legislator in person, we may have some great statistics just that show what's happened, but we want to use them sparingly. If we throw a bunch in, they're going to get lost. If we have one or two that have real impact, and we show them, that can have a real impact. So, but the first thing we want to do is provide the meaning first. So I don't know. I'm just throwing something out. If there has been 1,000 people that have been arrested, who are involved with 1,000 people involved with peaceful protests because of public demonstration, I've got one that from a numbers point of view, that we have that our jails in Ohio are overcrowded substantially by this many. If we arrest this many more, and then we give a specific number to that. If we arrest this many more, then it will just overcrowd things out much more. So using the meaning first, then the numbers. And with numbers, you don't want to just use them to establish the size of the problem, but what it means if we don't do something and the cost of ignoring it. And also use them to underscore the capacity of success. Again, Joan has kind of alluded to this earlier, but it's so important. Whether you're testifying, whether you're meeting a legislator in person, don't use extreme statements and partisan attacks, particularly talking, and because they'll do nothing but turn it off, turn people off. When we were testifying about SB 33, SB 33 was the piece of legislation that would criminalize people for for trespassing on
Critical infrastructure.
environmental related properties. There were people that went up there and attacked attacked Republicans in person that were on the committee. You lost every single Republican in the committee the first time you did that. Or somebody that attacked ALEC, which I have no use for ALEC, but there was members in that committee who were in the board of ALEC, and you lost the whole committee. Don't use extremist statements. Don't do partisan attacks, no matter how you feel about them. Don't talk in partisan terms. You're going to need to get Republican support. The second you talk about partisanship, you've lost everybody. You need to be thinking of what can I do to be successful, not what can I do to make myself feel better. I generally don't even use the word advocate myself. I don't go up and if I'm testifying or speaking to a legislator and say I'm advocating for this or that, because all of a sudden you're saying I'm on one side and you may be in the other. I think you want to establish a reasonable tone. So we can do this together. We all believe in justice. We all believe in freedom. Let's talk about how we can achieve this together. Again, using that strong level 1 values to provide a universal kind of feeling in terms of what we're doing to try to accomplish what the legislation we're trying to pass. Again, kind of encapsulating, you want to communicate appealing to values, and they act as a good starting point. So as you're meeting with the legislator, you're talking about from a communications point of view, start off that we all agree with XYZ value, and then go from there. And I think it brings it back to you, doesn't it, Joan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and people do change their minds. And we have seen, by appealing to values, amendments made in bills that have made a pretty big difference. You don't all, winning and losing is not, you don't think in terms of winning and losing, think in terms of what we can live with. And you'll be, setting yourselves up for, a much more positive outcome. Once again, t-shirts, by the way, a wonderful way to show a strong supportive group that comes with you is if people are wearing the same t-shirts. It does make a statement. And packing the hearing room, again, just to show you how that looks. Just kind of winding up here. Best practices. Don't insult the legislators, even if they seem off base. Believe it or not, even at their worst, most of them are really trying to serve their constituents and serve us. They just have a different idea of what that means. So, maybe not give them the benefit of the doubt, but at least treat them like human beings. Okay. Don't demean their questions, no matter how dumb they might seem. I've heard people in testimony say, well, that's a really stupid question. Well, of course, anything you have to say goes out the window after that. Don't perform. You're there to persuade and educate, not to perform, like Larry said, no matter how good it makes you feel. Don't go off topic, please. Don't bring in another bill that has no bearing on what you're saying right now, because once again, it just totally takes everything that you have to say that may be positive and tosses it out the window. And don't assume they oppose or support your views as a committee or a group or as individuals. I have been surprised by Republicans who wind up after the hearing agreeing with me or saying, that was a good point. Can I have a copy of your statement? I'm going, wow, okay, fine. So be surprised and be prepared to be surprised and make no assumptions. And this one story where this one poor woman just kept repeating in her testimony the conviction that the legislators would never listen to her. But you'll never listen to me. And then she went on. But you'll never listen to me. And then she went on. Well, actually, some of them wanted to listen to her, but she was so nasty that they didn't. Okay. And once again, another picture of what it means to be in a hearing. That's a crowded one. Anyway, questions. As we wrap up here. Moms love to fill the room with our red shirts. Yes, Shannon, they do, and you do, and that's wonderful. We also have UUs who come in these Side with Love t-shirts, which is really great. And the Ohio Poor People's Campaign who come in with their t-shirts too. It says something. Questions? You can unmute
There
yourself.
was one question.
Okay.
There was a question that was on the chat in regards to submitting written testimony for the redistricting hearings, and people can bring it with them. They don't have to, as opposed to the committee hearings. For these public hearings, anybody can bring it with them and leave it, or you don't have to do written testimony at all, though it's good to have it, but you can just bring it with you to any one of the hearings.
Yeah, they're different. They're different than what we're talking about at the State House. These public hearings on redistricting are a different animal, but yes, write it out though, and bring it with you so that you are organized and you know how you're going to present. Other questions? Okay. Or anybody who's done testimony before, are we off base on something? Or does your experience say something else to you? Okay. Any other questions or comments or observations or stories? Actually, it's fun doing the testimony.
Dave had a question.
Oh, Dave had a question? Okay, come on. Unmute yourself, Dave, and let me know.
Yeah. Actually, it's more of a comment or experience. So if a legislator is saying something incorrect that's on the committee, I have gently corrected them. I think that can be key. So thanks. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're given testimony and somebody says something that's incorrect off the committee, you can certainly say no, and I will send you the information. So that's a great point. If public witness is at an office, can it be effective? You mean like getting a whole group of people and doing a protest at somebody's office? Larry, have you, Larry, you want to comment on that? Yeah.
If you have, my perspective, if it's somebody that you think has been on your side or you're trying to urge to be on your side, I probably wouldn't do it. If it's somebody who's been opposed, I'll give you an example. There was many of us, some of us in this call, there were about 300 of us that went down to West Virginia to protest in front of Joe Manchin's office in regards to the voting rights bill and those kind of. Beg your pardon?
I was going to say For the People Act and filibuster.
Yes, the filibuster, and that was certainly a witness clear witness in front of his office. It was very effective. Got huge amounts of publicity, and for that legislator at that time, he made some changes soon after. Now I can't tell you for sure that it was because of that, but it certainly didn't hurt. And it got huge amounts of publicity, particularly in West Virginia, which is where we were all at. It was people from West Virginia and Kentucky and Ohio, and so it can be effective. Be disciplined in terms of how you're going to do it. I mean, who is it that you're doing it with? Where has his or her position been before this? And figure out what you expect to accomplish by doing that. If it's somebody that's been up in the air and you're doing a public witness, how's that person going to react by you doing a public witness in front of their office? I think you want to think about what you expect to accomplish as a result of that. How you would react if you were in that position.
And just know that most public witness is great for education, for organizing, for publicity. Maybe not so much on changing minds, but organizing, education, and publicity are very good things that we do need.
Yes.
So, great. Somebody's asking if healthcare is hopeless because it's expensive, a major change, or unpopular. Well, actually, it's pretty popular, but that this is why we need to be talking to people and meeting with legislators and at any of the hearings that have anything to do with healthcare issues.
And almost everybody agrees with healthcare. Not only that, I think the best thing about going, it's always been with single payer healthcare, has been it's a whole lot cheaper. So it's one of the big selling points.
And it's a big value.
Yes.
It's a major first level value.
Yes.
Okay, other questions? Okay, don't forget that next Thursday, we're going to be talking about how to craft testimony, which is really important. We get into the details there. I'm going to be sending this information out to you with talking points on these different bills. These are just the ones I know that some of you are working on. Others of you are working on a whole lot of others, but these are just some of the ones that I knew. And then next Thursday, tantalizing testimony and how to register for that workshop so you can help craft your testimony. And as I said, always have your testimony prepared in advance around bills because you never know when the hearing's going to be called. Like right now, I have testimony ready to rock on 387 and 109 and several other bills as soon as they come on for hearings. And then we're going to be doing fundamentals of legislative visits, where we really get into more of the strategy of how to do those visits in the office, whether in the office locally or in the office at the State House, because there's a kind of a little chess game that is played there, as you've probably already gotten an inkling of that reality. And then, of course, State House Stomp on September 22nd, rally, meetings with legislators, education, as well as a publicity event and our own education. So you'll be getting all of this in the email along with some contact here. So you can ask Larry questions, me questions. You can go to the Ohio Resistance Guide for Ohio Activists, which talks a great deal about what is effective and is not effective in communicating with legislators. So you can get that. And let's see here. Mia says, I get a little confused as to who I should be talking to. The Senate, the House, maybe sometimes City Council. Okay, how can we speak to, when do we know when there's a clear path of who to talk to, Larry?
If there's a bill that's in front of somebody, BODY, you want to be, if it's in the Ohio State, you can look up the legislation, as Jonas showed you earlier, and it'll show you where it's at this point, whether it's in the Senate or the House or what committee it is. If we're talking about local legislation, which could be in the county or the city, I think again you just need to look up. I think you just Google it for your city, and you'll find out where it's at that point. If it's a city, and then maybe if it's in Columbus or in Cleveland, it'll probably be in the city council, will be in some kind of a committee. And again, if you call the clerk's office, they'll be able to tell you the information for the city or for the county.
And as far as who you should be talking to, it depends on where the legislation is being debated. If it's being debated in the Senate Judiciary Committee, then your focus is on the Senate Judiciary Committee members and the senators. If the bill is being discussed in the Government Oversight Committee of the House, then of course those are the members you concentrate on, as well as your own House representatives who have to vote on that when it gets out of committee. So it depends on what bill you're talking about and where it's located. And this is why you talk with other people and are part of a coalition, because no one person can keep track of all of this. It takes a village to keep track of where the bills are, who's hearing them, and at what stage they're in. And Jeff put in there to attend State House Stomp. You can sign up at the particular link that he put in the chat. Also, I've had somebody who said, well, we'd like to know more about Facebook and Twitter and using social media to deal with our legislators and talk with them, maybe how to do a Twitter storm. That's another workshop. And we'll put that one on the schedule because that's an entirely different set of skills that would be needed along with phone banking. But how to do that is a different set of skills. We didn't go into that this time other than to note that Twitter storms can be particularly effective for legislators. But how to do that and how to craft those messages, we need another workshop, and I'm going to put that little bug on Jeff's ear there, because he's one of those folk that is doing a lot of social media work for us. All righty. And David, yes, David has a
I
question.
just wanted to add that if Mia was considering like bringing up just a general issue and who to go to. So your local council, they're usually pretty available, just to call them up and to talk to your ward councilman. And then also the state legislators, their staff is pretty available. You can call their staff and they can maybe help you decide where to go with whatever issue that you are talking about. So to get started, or if there's some particular issue that's you don't know what's particularly going on with that, they're pretty open, and then both on the state level and your local councilman. Thanks.
Right. And if you have a particular cause near and dear to your heart, start with your own local representative and work your way up. And getting to know the aides is wonderful. If you can talk with the aides, if you can get to know them on a first name basis so that they've got your phone number and email and you got theirs, it's absolutely fabulous. And don't be upset if you get a talk to an aide rather than to a legislator when you make an appointment, because those aides, I used to teach them, but those aides actually craft the positions that the legislators then adopt. They know more often than the legislators themselves do. Don't tell the legislators that. Larry, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to agree with you that if you can get to know any or some of the aides and you can develop some kind of relationship with them, that can be just incredibly helpful. And just because, as I say, they have lots of information, they can get you into all the kind of other places that the legislator either is not going to have the time or the inclination to do.
And they'll tell you where the energy is and who's playing chess and who's playing checkers on the different committees, which can be incredibly helpful. All right, my friends.
I wanted to make one final push. I know Joan's mentioned it a couple times. Also, Joan, Larry, once again, you knocked it out of the park with this. Thank you so much for all this useful information. I'm sure everyone really is appreciative of all this. Thank you very much. Just wanted to make one final push for State House Stomp. We're going to need a lot of visibility to keep these bills from becoming law. And having a big in-person event like this, we're going to be very COVID safe, following all the CDC protocols, social distancing and masking. We're having a big push for the rally outside of the State House. We also, I dropped the link earlier just now. I can drop it again for State House Stomp. Signing up for legislative visits. I see of the 14 people on this call, I see 3 of you have already signed up for legislative visits. I really appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for that. Everyone else, sign up, follow their example. And yeah, thank you for coming, everyone. And we hope to see you next week. Thank you very much. Thanks, Joan, Larry.
Preserve your First Amendment rights, right to assembly and right to free speech. If there's anything else before I close with another John Lewis quote. Okay. John Lewis also said, take a long, hard look down the road you'll have to travel if you make a commitment to work for change. Know that this transformation will not happen right away. Change takes time. It rarely happens all at once. We must understand, he says, that the struggle for change is not a struggle that lasts for a few days, a few weeks, or a few months. It's the struggle of a lifetime. So thank you all. And I will be sending all of this information out to you tomorrow. Thanks.